Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chicago IANDS. So glad to see you today. It's a lovely day out there. Hard to come inside, so we're grateful that you decided to join us. We're gonna, as we usually do, we're going to take just a moment to do a brief meditation. So if you have things on your lap or on things in your way, you might want to clear the path and get yourself in a place so you can be relaxed and let yourself kind of drift off and where you go when you go. Let your eyes gently close. Welcome back. Couple of short announcements. One is next month our speaker will be Dr. Pim Van Lommel. He's a wonderful guy. He's my age. He's 82, I think, and he is a cardiologist, and he spent his life, much of his life, doing research on near-death experiences. He has a marvelous book, and I've given it to a lot of doctors, and it's just really, he's excellent in every way. So I hope you'll join us. He lives in the Netherlands, and he'll be joining us from the Netherlands to speak to our group next month. So we hope that you can join us and enjoy him too. And the other little tidbit is the National IANDS Conference is in Chicago, August 27th to 31st at the Oak Brook Hilton. If you're interested in going, go to iands.org and click on the link for the conference. The conference fee is 370 something dollars, I think, if you're a member, and 400 and something if you're not. And the hotel is $170 a night with a discounted rate. Um, so, you know, you can you can view the whole schedule online of what's happening. About half the conference has to be paid for again separately, uh, because that's how they do it now. Um, so you have to decide what's in your best interest that in that way. You can just sign up and watch it online, which is a nice thing to do. I fell a couple of years ago and can't walk very well, so I know that I can't walk there. So I've invested in a mobility scooter so I can at least go for one day, but I doubt that I'll be there for the whole thing. But um, I don't know. It's just so much fun getting old. What can I say? At any rate, it's happening. So if you want to be a part of it, you're welcome to do that. You just have to go and sign up. If you want the early discounts, which help a little bit, you have to do it by Monday. So um, make that decision. And then I'm not going to give a long introduction for our speaker, Brian, because he's going to tell you all about his story, which is wonderful. And he's such a gifted, he's a gift to our community and helping with people who've lost loved ones, especially. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brian. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat box, and we'll handle them as best we can. And welcome, Brian. So glad
Uh,
you're here.
well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you guys today. I know we have a fairly small audience today, so I'm going to give a presentation. Probably last an hour or so. If you'd like to interrupt and make it interactive, that's fine with me. Once I start giving the presentation, I won't be able to see you very well. But if you want to just jump in, that's fine too. I have to say that IANDS has a really special place for me in my heart. I started studying the afterlife many decades ago, but when my daughter passed away in June of 2015, one of the sources I turned to was IANDS. I live in Cincinnati, so I started going to the local IANDS group, and it was really great that even as a non-experiencer, and in case anybody knows, no spoiler, I'm not an experiencer, but that people there welcomed me. They took me in, and I was able to listen to their stories and share my story, and it was really cool. And as you guys know, a lot of people who are experiencers have mediumistic abilities. So people would say, "Who's the little girl that's following you around?" And my daughter was actually going to the meetings with me, which was really cool. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you what I call a new perspective on death. And I know a lot of you guys have already got a lot of this, because you kind of preaching to the choir here. But I want to kind of maybe bring it back for you, for people who maybe aren't experiencers, who are like wondering, why do we believe what we believe? What is, are we just woo woo people? Are we wishful thinking? My background is I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer by nature, also by training, and I want to know like how things work. I'm not the kind of person that takes a lot of stuff on faith. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So let me bring this up here. Let's see. Keynote. And we don't need sound. All right. And play. All right. Can you guys see my presentation?
Yes.
All right, good. Sometimes I get that wrong, so I always want to ask before I start going. One time I got like halfway through the presentation, everybody's like, "We don't see your slides," so I had learned to ask before I get started. So, my business, what I do, I'm a life coach. I'm a certified grief educator, and I call my business Grief to Growth, and that's the branding I use on everything, because I believe that when we go through a grief event, we are actually planted, not buried. And the difference between being planted and buried, it's interesting. It's the same motion, right? You put something in the ground, but it's the intention. When you plant something, you expect growth. You expect something to come of it. Come of it. When we bury something, like when we bury a body, we don't expect that body to come back. We bury things that we don't expect to come back. So when we're going through these grief events, we feel like we've been buried, but my argument is that we've actually been planted. So I'm going to talk about again what experience, what philosophy, and what science reveals. When I'm working with clients, when I'm talking to people, I never ask anybody to take what I say on faith. I grew up in a faith tradition, and that's fine if people believe stuff like that. That's wonderful. But for me, I want to talk about why it is that I believe what I believe, so I can help other people get to that. I like to start off with this little story, and I'm going to tell the first part of the story now, and I'll finish it up at the end when we get to the end of the presentation. But my daughter, Kayla, who is 28 years old now, when she was 9 months old, we were living in Lexington, Kentucky. I was working for a company. I was working for Sun Microsystems. This was the heyday of the dot-com bubble. I was making a lot of money. It was a great job. It was, my wife, I said Kayla was 9 months old. My wife had decided to stay home with our daughter. So everything was going great. Then this event happened at the company. Somebody did something that I wasn't really even involved in. But long story short, I ended up getting fired. So I'm fired from my job. My daughter, again, is 9 months old. I'm the sole breadwinner. I was planning on moving to Cincinnati, where I live now at the time, and I was angry. I was furious. It was unfair. It was unjust. It was the timing couldn't have been worse. And I thought about suing the company and everything. So that's the beginning of the story. So hold that in mind as we go through the presentation. Then I'll finish at the end. So we're going to discuss my background. Who am I? Why should you listen to me? What brought me to this point in my life? We're going to talk about the problem that we have, when it comes to the concept of death. I'm going to present to you some evidence for what it is that I'm saying. I'm going to talk about two basic ways of viewing life and death. I'm going to talk about a decision point in my life. Then I'm going to talk about a third way that we can view life and death. I'll talk about a second decision point in my life, what the inspiration is for what I do today, why we misunderstand, I think, about what death is. And then we're going to talk about two basically new ways of viewing things. Talk a little bit about what is grief. We sometimes think we know what grief is, but I think it's a lot more encompassing than people realize a lot of times. I'm going to talk about a few tools that I give to people to use when we're going through grief events, and then we'll summarize. So my objective for today is, by the time we finish this, and again, I always feel kind of weird when I'm talking to IANDS groups because you guys are a special group, right? But I want you to understand who you are. I want you to understand why you're here, where you came from, and where you're going. And I think these are the four key things that so many people are confused by these days. We've forgotten who we are as individuals and as a species. We find ourselves on this rock spinning around in space, and we don't know why we're here. We don't know where we came from, and we certainly don't know where we're going. If you can answer these four questions with confidence, you can literally change your life. I mean, literally, not that's not an exaggeration. So my background, when I was a child, I was terrified of death, and I was a weird child. I'm still a weird person. I think about things that most people don't think about, and I thought about death as a child. What is this? Why am I here? Why do I feel like I've been abandoned? I was taught that it says I was raised in a faith tradition. I was raised in a very traditional Pentecostal church. My grandfather was actually the pastor of our church. I was taught that life was a binary thing. Afterlife was binary. There was heaven, there was hell. There's no in between. It's black or white. It's one way or the other. That was a very, very scary proposition to me. I used to lay awake at night and wonder why would I take this gamble? Why would I come into this life? It's not worth the risk. But again, I told you I was a weird child. But my grandfather was my pastor, and my Sunday school teachers were all my parents' friends. So when you're a little kid and people tell you things, you don't have any choice but to believe them. These people are, adults are basically perfect. They know everything. They've been here forever. So I had no way of saying this isn't true. And it literally, I'm not gonna say literally drove me insane, but it kept me awake at night. I started having panic attacks when I was a teenager. It's something that weighed on me 24/7 for better part of 3 decades. So when it comes to death in our society, for most of us, death is a stranger. It's a mystery. We hide death away. We don't want to talk about death. We don't want to think about death. I remember my father talking about when he was a child, when someone would pass, they'd bring their body to the house and they put it in a parlor, and people come around. But now, people pass and the body gets whisked away. A lot of people get to be an adult and never see the body of someone who's passed. Children, used to grow up on farms. They'd see life and death every day. It used to be that death was actually, frankly, more common. People are scared, and we're scared of things that we don't understand. We live in a very youth-oriented culture. We want to cheat death. We want to, get the Botox injections and have the surgeries and take the medications and the pills and the whatever. And we want to not even admit we're getting older. We dye our hair. I was doing a podcast with the guy yesterday. We were talking about our beards. My beard is white. And there was a time it's like, should I dye my beard? Because we want to present this appearance of youth, of health, of vitality. We have preconceived notions of when people should die. We've been blessed with medical advances that mean more and more people get to be older. Life expectancies are growing. So we forget that no one's guaranteed. My daughter was 15 when she passed. Since I've been doing this work and working with helping parents heal, I know that some people they don't get 5 minutes on the planet, let alone 80 years. But we have this notion that everybody should live to be 80 or 90 or 100. And it's just not the case. Everybody's lifespan is different. We have little to no knowledge of the afterlife. And as I said, I know we fear things we don't understand. And this analogy came to me a long time ago. It's like you're walking down this hallway and you're looking at doors on both sides. This is your life, right? The hallway. And there's all these events that go on in your life. You get married, you get divorced, you get a job, you have children. You're walking in and out of these rooms at these various events. But at the end of the hallway, there's this big door called death. And you know that you're going to go through that door at some point. The other doors are optional, but this one you're going to go through. And as far as you know, when people go through this door, they don't come back, and you have no idea what's on the other side of it. That's the way most people live their lives. But then what do? They distract themselves. Oh, I'm never going to die. It's not going to happen to me. But we don't have the knowledge, and we also view death as the ultimate failure. Doctors are trained in medical schools, keep patients alive. We want to stay alive at all costs. We spend more money as a society in the last few weeks of some people's lives. I think it's like a third of our medical expenses are spent in that last few weeks because we want to keep people in the body for as long as we possibly can because of all the reasons I listed earlier. Because we view death as the ultimate failure. It is the thing to be fought, and I think that's a mistake. So again, going back to when I was a kid and they told me all these things and it didn't make any sense to me, I was like, well, how can I figure this out? How can I learn? I always loved science, math. When I was a kid, I used to take things apart. I get in trouble because I take things apart that were working to see how they worked, and I couldn't get them back together again. But I always wanted to know, how does this stuff work? So as I said, I wasn't engineering. I liked engineering because engineering gives you answers. You have formulas. You know the right answer, and that's what I was looking for in life. So I started studying everything I could get my hands on when it comes to the afterlife at a pretty early age. So, in general, there are three ways to know that an afterlife exists. One would be direct evidence or experience, which some of you guys have. You've been there. Most of us don't get that direct experience, but we can get evidence, and we'll talk about some of the ways we can get evidence. There's also scientific evidence, and believe it or not, there is a lot of scientific evidence that points to the fact that an afterlife does exist. There are also philosophical arguments. We can make reasoned appeals to why we think that life goes on, and some of those are actually very, very strong. And then there's also religion. There is this revealed stuff that people have come to, and I don't poo-poo religion. I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't call myself a Christian anymore for various reasons that I'll probably talk about as we go through this presentation here. But religion can teach us a lot as well. So these are some of the basic ways to know an afterlife exists, and there's a lot of information in each of these buckets. Now, I believe that one of the strongest pieces of evidence for the afterlife is the near-death experience. And I'll give you some reasons why. Most people who have had an near-death experience are convinced that the afterlife is real. They don't say that they think it's real. They don't say that, I'm pretty sure it's real. They say, I know that it's real. They say that the afterlife is actually realer than real. They're like, when you're here, this is the dream. The afterlife, let me tell you, this is real. And so there are um, and the other thing about the NDE, because sometimes people say, well, it's just wishful thinking. It's what people expect. People who are religious, they see Jesus. People who are atheists, the thing is, it's a very representative population. We know that the near-death experience occurs across genders, across religions, across cultures, etc. Now, there are some differences in the NDEs, but as far as the population that has them, it's everybody, rich, poor, young, old, etc. And when we think about the near death experience, people try to tell us that that you would think it's a very rare thing. The estimates 5 to 10% of the population has had an NDE. If you look at the population of the United States right now, about 350 million people. By my math, that's something like 15 to 15 to 30 million people in the United States now have probably had this experience. Look across the world, there's 8 billion people on the planet. We're talking hundreds of millions of people. And then you multiply that across time, going back to the history of mankind, billions of people have probably had this experience. It's not a rare, I mean, it is a relatively rare experience, but it's something that's been experienced by a lot of people. And when you talk to these people again, they are convinced that this is a real experience. There's no other experience like this that we would deny is real other than the near death experience. And that's only because people just don't want to accept that it's real. Um, and again, I talked about one of the ways that we can know things is by direct evidence or experience. So while I have not had an NDE, I've talked to many, many people who have. I've never been to China, but I do believe that China exists because I know people who have been there, and I see evidence that things come from China. So that is, to me, that is a sense of direct evidence. And there's also other forms of evidence. There's mediumship. There's signs and synchronicities, et cetera. There are lots of different ways that we can have this experience or have some knowledge of this. I want to talk about subjective versus objective because, again, in our society, we've kind of said subjective experience doesn't mean anything. If you see something by yourself, then it doesn't really matter. But what is subjective versus objective? Well, objective, we just call if two or more people see something at the same time, we call that objective. But that's not really a great measure of whether something is subjective or objective. And as I started thinking about this, I realized every experience we have is subjective. That's all we have is subjective experience. So when we trust a scientist who says, I ran this experiment And these are the results I got. What did he do? He ran an experiment. He looked at an instrument and he reported his subjective experience of what the instrument read. And so we say, well, because he's a scientist and because it can be replicated, then it's objective, but it's truly not. So everything is subjective experience. So I really get frustrated when people say, well, near-death experiences are only subjective, therefore they don't carry the weight of objective experience. I reject that notion. There is a lot of scientific evidence, and as I mentioned, near-death experiences, of course, but after-death communications, reincarnation memories in children. Dr. Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia have interviewed a couple thousand children who can remember being alive before, who report stories, information that there is no way they should have, who maybe speak different languages that they've never been taught, who can talk about, there's one kid that comes to mind. He said he was an actor in Hollywood, and he named the guy's name. This guy was a B actor, like hardly anybody had ever heard of. He knew which street he grew up on. He knew which street he lived on. He knew that he had been married and divorced 2 or 3 times. He knew, lots of stuff that this kid should not have known. There's laboratory experiments. One of the first books I read, ironically, when I started studying stuff, was The Afterlife Experiments by Dr. Gary Schwartz. And I say ironically because I actually work with Gary now because Gary's working on something called the Soul Phone. And I've got to meet Gary and I've got to introduce him a couple of times at different events. But Gary is a brilliant scientist, and he took mediums and he put them in labs, and he created experiments with double and triple blind, and showed beyond any reasonable doubt that mediumship is real. So there's laboratory technology. As I said, Gary's working on technology. He's published a little bit on it, but you'll see more about that probably soon. Dr. Sonia Rinaldi down in Brazil has done things in the laboratory. So I've got some of the books up here that I have happened to read. Dr. Penny Satori studied near-death experiences, wrote a great book about it. Julie Beischel has written books about mediumship. So when I give this presentation, I think about this. I think about my friend. I can say her name because she doesn't care. My friend Kim, who I knew on Facebook for years, and her husband had passed away, and she's a hardcore atheist, materialist. This stuff doesn't exist. And she goes, Brian, you're a pretty smart guy. Why do you believe this? Tell me, why. And I said, she said, well, I don't believe in mediumship. Send me to the best medium you know. So I sent her to my friend, the best medium I knew at the time. And she came back, she goes, okay, she blew me away. I used a fake name. I used my friend's credit card. She told me all about my husband. Give me more. So I started giving her some of these books. And she came back and she's a professional debunker. She worked for Snopes at the time. And she goes, why didn't I know this evidence was out there? And I'm like, it is. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I say to people, if you want evidence, it's there. Now there's also philosophical reasoning. Um, One of my heroes is a guy named Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, and Dr. Kastrup is a computer scientist. He's also got a PhD in philosophy. And I don't know a lot about philosophy, but I love him because he presents it so that I can understand it. And one of the first books I read from him was called Why Materialism is Baloney. How true skeptics know there is no death and fathom answers to life, the universe, and everything. He's got several books out now. And he also started a foundation called Essentia, Essentia. And he's got many videos on YouTube. I was lucky enough to interview him for my podcast. An amazing guy, clear thinker, who can give you reasons why consciousness, and I'll talk a lot more about this, why consciousness precedes the material, and the material is actually within consciousness, not the other way around. Another gentleman wrote a book called Why an Afterlife Obviously Exists. His name is Jens Amberts, and I'm trying to get him on my podcast. We've had some problems, but it's a thought experiment about near-death experiences, and he makes a very, very convincing case. Some of I've given you already. How many people have had NDEs? What they report? Why it's realer than real. So those are a couple of things. There's also consciousness research that is finally starting to be done. Years ago when science and religion kind of took their split, religion said, we'll handle the spiritual stuff. Science said, we'll handle the material. And so science, since they didn't know what to do with consciousness, just said, well, we're just going to ignore consciousness. We're just not even going to study it. We don't know how to study it. We can't replicate it in the lab. So let's just forget that consciousness even exists. Science is starting to finally start to look at like consciousness. But the first thing you have to figure out is what is it? And that's been difficult to actually even define. But quantum mechanics, quantum physics, you've heard of, is starting to show that consciousness does play a role even in the material world. So these things are coming along. Now, there's a couple of guiding principles of science. It's really the same way, or two ways of saying the same thing. Parsimony is the word that Dr. Kastrup will use, which is a guiding principle that suggests that all things being equal, you should prefer the simplest possible explanation for a phenomenon or the simplest possible solution to a problem. Occam's razor is similar, that if you're looking at two different things, you should go with the simplest one, with the simplest solution with the fewest assumptions. Now, what's interesting is when you talk to skeptics and you talk to them about near death experiences, they will come up with all kinds of crazy reasons to explain it. It's the lack of oxygen to the brain. It's the drugs that the person on is on. It's an evolutionary, development. Well, what evolutionary advantage would there be to having detailed experiences while you're dying? That makes absolutely no sense. And they have controlled for drugs. They have controlled for hypoxia, the lack of oxygen. And when people are having these experiences because of, say, lack of oxygen, you don't get more detailed, rich experiences. You get more like crazy hallucinations, if anything. So, same thing when it comes to mediumship. People will come up with all kinds of stuff. And it's really funny because even materialists will say, well, they're not really reading the mind, they're not, bringing information from the dead person. They're just reading the mind of the alive person. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You said that mind is in the brain. How could they read the mind of the alive person even? But they'll make up stuff like that. They'll make up things like infinite universes to explain why we have a universe with life in it. So they're not following their own principles of parsimony or of Occam's razor. So the information, the conclusions that I present, I believe are the most parsimonious solutions to this data that we've got. So there are two basic ways of viewing life and death, two extreme ways, I guess I should say. One would be religion, and I mentioned I was raised in a religious background. Now, the good thing about religion, it does give you a life of meaning. It does answer some of these questions: who we are, why we're here, stuff like that. But it can also come with a lot of judgment. It comes with a lot of rules. It teaches us that a spirit world exists, but frankly, a lot of religion says a spirit world exists, but you don't want to go there. You don't want to talk to people in the spirit world because that's an evil thing. So religion does have some answers, but it also presents some limits. There's also the other opposite is materialism, and this has been on the rise in our Western culture for the last at least couple hundred years. Now, materialism tells us that life is meaningless, that life is accidental, that we come into existence when we're born in this body, when our brain comes online, and we go out of existence when our brain goes offline, which tells us that death is the end. And all that exists is what can be observed and be measured. Now, materialism has been very beneficial in terms of scientific advancement. I think this is one of the reasons why we embrace it so much, because we all love our iPhones. We all love the breakthroughs we've had by science and studying the material. It's been wonderful, but it's also taken away meaning from our life. It's given us a fear of death. It's given us a kind of a malaise because we're like, what's the point of all this? If it's all going to end, very soon anyway, just randomly, then why even bother? And when I started thinking about this, I realized that the rigid spiritual aspect and the religion materialist aspect have a lot of things in common. They're very authoritarian. They tell you exactly how to think. They're rigid. They're like, this is impossible. Don't even think about that. They basically think they know it all. I think it was in the 1920s, they were talking about shutting down the US Patent Office because they said everything that there is to be discovered has already been discovered. That's what that kind of mindset can lead you to. So there's a lot of overlap between these two. They're very much two sides of the same coin. So I'd say the people that are materialistic atheists, to me, they're just another form of fundamentalists. It's the same thing as the religious side. It's just a different words. Now, there is a third option to look at these things, and I believe that's what's called spirituality or spiritualism, not spiritualism, but spirituality. And I really I shy away from the word spirituality, even though I mean, I'm just using it right here, because it implies woo-woo. And I think it's actually the most scientific way to look at this. It's taking all the data into consideration. It's not saying we're going to put consciousness aside. It's saying consciousness obviously plays a role. Conscious obviously plays a central role in our experience. And it's saying, how do I bring all this together? And I was interviewing a guy from my podcast, Dr. David Gaggins, and we were talking about this term metaphysics, which I'd heard before, but I really didn't understand it. And metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that explores the fundamental nature of reality, existence, and the relationships between mind, matter, and the cosmos. Unlike traditional religious views, which often rely on specific doctrines and rituals, or atheistic materialism, which confines reality to the physical and observable phenomena, again, two ends of the spectrum, metaphysics opens the door to a broader understanding of life and death. So this is, to me, the sweet spot. This is what I want to look at. It's like I want to look at something that looks at all the data and all the things we have to study. Um, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear the sound of this because I don't think I shared my sound, but this is an interview I did, a clip of an interview I did with Dr. Gagan. You introduced metaphysics. So tell me what metaphysics is.
Meta means beyond. And so basically it's beyond physics. So what you're getting is, the science looks at physics, the physical world, and metaphysics, it considers the physical world, it considers religion, but it considers everything else too, philosophy, ESP, all of the other things. So it takes everything that you could possibly think of, and it puts it into the package that says, okay, we have to consider that. We can't have certain elements, like science says, well, ESP doesn't exist. Well, ESP does exist, and so that needs to be considered when we're trying to figure out, what's going on around us.
So and this was just a couple of years ago. I talked to him. I was like, okay, this is, to me, this is it. This is, because again, religion a lot of times, and there was a split as I started studying history a little bit. I realized there was kind of a split between religions and science. And it's really interesting because when science first came about, it was religious people. All the scientists were religious. There were really hardly any atheists at the time, and they said, we live in an orderly universe created by an orderly God, so we should be able to understand God by studying His creation, which I think is a really interesting approach. And then again, after the split and after this war, when they were fighting over territory, finally they kind of came to a truce, which says religion's going to ignore the material world and science that we're going to ignore the spiritual. And I like this idea of bringing these things together because I think that's what makes the most sense. If you're interested in his book is called Our Eternal Existence, or check out the interview on my YouTube channel. It was a fascinating interview with him. And so when I started looking at this, I realized that we've got the physical reality, which is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And this is what we experience with our five senses. And physics, chemistry, biology, traditional medicine, astronomy, geology, engineering, we study those things. And it gets us a long way when it comes to manipulating our material world. We've done a fantastic job of manipulating the material world. But below the waterline, below the surface, is metaphysics, quantum mechanics, consciousness study, parapsychology, spirituality, esotericism, transpersonal psychology, near death studies, astrology, alternative healing. That is the bulk of what's going on in our world. So we're studying and manipulating this one little part of it, but we're ignoring the main aspect of it. So just to kind of keep beating on this, religion is based on traditions of man. This is passed down. It's a lot of times written down in scripture. It has rules. It's binding. The word religion comes from the Latin word religare, I think it is, to fasten, to bind, or to tie. Now, it's interesting that word can have two meanings. It can bring us together. That's great. But it can also bind us, which is what it does to a lot of people. But spirituality, on the other hand, is based upon your experience. Spirituality it encourages you to explore. It encourages you to trust yourself. Spirituality is actually freeing. So I look at religion. I don't put down anybody who's a religious person. I think it's great. To me, it's frankly kind of like training wheels. It's a great way to get us started, but we don't have to stop there. Now, in my religious tradition, we were taught that we were dirty, we were broken, that we were far away from God, that we were unworthy, and that we were guilty. And so I like this where it's, instead of saying you were too dirty or you were too dirty for God to cleanse, you're not dirty at all. Instead of saying you're not too broken for God to fix, which is what some religions tell us, I'm going to say you're not broken. I'm going to say that you're not too far for God to reach. You've never been far from God. You cannot be far from God by definition. You're never too guilty for God to forgive. You're not guilty, and you're not too worthless for God to redeem. You're not worthless. And these are the conclusions I've come to from studying spirituality. So this is a very different way of looking at it than the way some religions teach us, which is like you're this broken little worthless thing that God is maybe going to have mercy on, as opposed to you are a part of God. And that's because I was like, when I was a kid, I was like, well, why does God love me so much if I'm all these terrible things? It didn't make any sense to me. And I couldn't understand why he was so angry at me, frankly. So I'm going to talk about what we misunderstand. And the thing is, again, coming from a religious background, um, like why do people? Every time I talk about this, I think about a good friend of mine who was deeply, deeply religious. This guy was involved in the church. He was actually a missionary. He would go places like China and places where he weren't supposed to spread the gospel, and he would sneak Bibles in and stuff like that. And then he became a total materialistic atheist. And what I realize is that people have these views of God, what they call God. One is what I call the Santa Claus God. And that's the God that you do good things, you get good stuff. You do bad things, you get a lump of coal. And people, what happens is with their faith, is something bad happens in their life, what we call bad, which happens in every single life. If you live long enough, something's going to happen bad in your life. And then people say, well, you must have done something wrong. And it's really interesting because I grew up studying the Bible. In the book of Job, when Job is going through his trials, his friends keep coming to Job and saying, Job, you must have sinned. You did something wrong because this is how God is. God would not punish you if you didn't do anything wrong. That's the kind of faith that falls apart very quickly when something bad happens to you. Then the other version of God that we get sometimes is the angry God, the God that I grew up believing, the God that says, you screw up one time and you're going to eternal hell. And people, as they get older and they start to think and they say, okay, you tell me God is loving, but he's also so angry. Both of these things cannot be true. Therefore, God does not exist. And that's what leads to a lot of atheism as well. So these false images of God, there's a guy named Jonathan Edwards, was a guy that lived in I think it was like the 1800s, and he has a famous sermon called "Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God." And I'll leave this up; you guys can read it if you'd like. But he talks about God holding us over the pit of hell, like you'd hold a spider over a flame, and God hates you basically, and the sun doesn't even want to shine upon you because you're so evil, and the earth, it doesn't even want you walking on it. But if you're lucky, God might not throw you into into the flame. And this is the way that people taught in a lot of churches. It wasn't quite that extreme in the church I grew up in, but it pretty much was. And this cartoon kind of illustrates it. God's holding this guy over a flame, saying, "Tell me you love me and make it sincere." And this is what gave me fear when I was a child because I knew I was supposed to tell God that I loved him, but I thought God was a monster. So it didn't work well for me. And then as I started studying spirituality, this is a book. This is from the book called The Team. It's a series of books. There are four books. This one's called Beyond the Team. It's book four by a woman named Frances Key. And this is channeled from her mother who passed in the spirit and channeled these books through Frankie. And if you guys haven't talked to Frankie before, she's phenomenal. But this is a passage from one of her books. It says, "Imagine sitting on the floor with your head in the lap of the most compassionate being you can imagine. Imagine this being stroking your hair as you speak of your deep sense of remorse. Feel and accept the tenderness in this being's hand, and then imagine this being is you holding you. Look into the eyes of this alternate self, the self that made the wiser choice in an alternative reality, and accept what she has extended to you. Not only is she offering you compassion, she's offering you the opportunity to merge with her to become the very self that you wish you had been. Now, contrast those two things from Jonathan Edwards and from Frankie Key, and which one makes you feel better, right? And this is why a lot of people leave religion. Now, again, not all religions are the same, not all churches are the same, not even all Christian churches are the same. There are 30 to 40,000 Christian denominations. There's a wide range, and I found some good churches before I left Christianity. But this is a difference between fundamental religion and between spirituality that tells you to turn within, to trust yourself, to trust your heart, that you are a part of this great whole, that you are a small aspect of this greater thing that we all call God. So I talked about two decision points. My first decision point was, that thing that my I was taught in church and everything that drove me crazy, and I started studying the afterlife. That was when I was in my mid 20s, I think, and actually was frankly when my uncle was murdered, and my uncle was gay, and I was told because he was gay and he wasn't part of the church that he was in hell. So that was a big turning point for me. Then in June of 2015, this is my 15-year-old daughter, Shayna. This picture was taken a few weeks before she passed. Shayna passed away suddenly. She went to bed one night and she didn't wake up the next morning. So at this point, I had been studying the way I have, for probably about 30 years or so. And so I had a really pretty good handle on the afterlife. I never worried about Shayna, where she was, all that kind of stuff. But I wondered about me. Like, how do I handle this grief? Because I didn't know I could have a relationship with her at the time. I thought, she's in heaven, whatever that is, wherever that is. So I'm off to a second quest. And just to give you some idea, of what it was like, this picture, I remember my wife, it was almost a month to the day after Shayna passed, because it was a month to the day. It was my wife's birthday. And Shayna passed 1 month before my wife's birthday. And we went to a movie and we came out of the movie and we talked to each other. We said, how are people just walking around like everything's okay? Like the world is normal. Because for us, in an instant, our world had gone from this to this. There was just like no color in the world. And I remember hearing people describe it. And then there's one woman that I heard, she literally, because of her grief, stopped seeing color. It literally drained the color out of her eyes. So this is what the world felt like. It was flat. It was like, why am I still here? I don't want to be here. I just want to be where Shayna is. So what I realized though, and it was really interesting because I started going to grief meetings, and the first one I went to, there was a woman there, and her daughter had passed away. I think it was about 10 years earlier. And this woman was, I imagine, just as angry and bitter and sad as she was the day her daughter passed. She told the story again. I imagine the way she told it probably thousands of times. And it was just horrible being in the room with her. And I've always said we can learn from everybody. In fact, I think everybody's here to teach us. Some people are here to teach us how to be, and some people will teach us here how not to be. And I heard the saying once, it's like you can either be a great example or you can be a terrible warning. This woman was a terrible warning. So I don't know her name. I'll never know her name, but I she taught me something that day. And I walked out and I looked at my wife who's there to my, what is that, my right, I guess. I looked at my daughter Kayla, who's Shayna's older sister, and I said, the vow that I took to be miserable for the rest of my life is not going to work. I got to figure out how am I going to do something with my life. And at first, it was for them. It was for Kayla, and it was for Twana. And then I realized Shayna wants me to have a good life too. Shayna doesn't want me to be miserable, and I don't say wouldn't want me. Shayna doesn't want me miserable because I know she's still here. And then eventually I got to the point where it's like I need to live for myself as well. So for me, it went in that order: first for Twana and for Kayla, then for Shayna, and then for me. And that's the way it worked for me. So again, back to studying. So this is what I do full time now. I mean, I'm if I'm not listening to a podcast, I'm reading a book or I'm watching something, trying to figure this whole thing out. So what I want to impart to people who have lost someone, what if this is not the end of a journey? But what if this is the beginning of a journey? Because I think every ending is a beginning. We don't get off this ride. We change seats, but we don't get off. So I thought about that, and I'm like, okay, well, of course it's the beginning for Shayna. Shayna's off having a great time. It is a beginning for her. But I also realized this is the new beginning for me. This is, and we talked about the planet not buried. I started to think, okay, if you plant a seed, you don't get a seed. You get a plant. You get a flower. You get fruit. So this is also the beginning for me. So this is a double meaning. It's a for our loved ones who have passed in the spirit, it's a beginning for them. But for us who remain, it can be a beginning as well. So there's two life-changing views for me of everything. And the first one is I kind of alluded to it earlier that we are all part of a team. We are in America, especially, we are so individualistic. We're like, okay, what's my meaning for life? Why am I here? And after I read Frankie's books, those books changed my life. I'm like, it's not all about me. It's about my family, my wife, my other daughter Kayla. It's about my ancestors. It's about my guides. It's about people that I haven't even met in this lifetime. I am here living on behalf of a team. And the other view, as I mentioned earlier, was Bernardo Kastrup's that consciousness is everything. That this material world that we live in, and I'll talk more in detail about this, but this isn't it. This is far from it. This is just like a little teeny thing that we come into for a very small period of time for a very specific reason. So let's start with consciousness is everything. So when it comes to cosmology, the way that we look at the universe, the all that is, two basic views, as I mentioned earlier, is materialism. All there is what we can see, what we can measure, what we can measure with our instruments. So there's energy, of course, which we can't see or feel, but there's this material stuff. But that's all there is. Consciousness arises from this. So somehow, at some point in time, which is also interesting because time has a beginning too, but we won't go there right now. At some point in time, this material is here. And then after a bunch of stuff happens, consciousness comes out of it. Well, scientists can't even tell us what consciousness is, and there's not even a model for how consciousness arises from the material. There's no that mechanism has never been explained. But if you believe this, that follows that when the body dies, consciousness dies because consciousness is coming from your body. So if you believe all that, basically there's not much meaning in it, right? Idealism is that consciousness is actually the foundation. The consciousness is, and this solves a lot of problems too, like why is there a beginning of time? Why is there anything at all? Where did it come from? Well, it's consciousness. Consciousness is the foundation. And for any system that you're going to have, you need to have at least one or two assumptions. So this is the assumption that idealists say that it's like, give me an assumption. Consciousness. Consciousness is the foundation. If you start with that, you can explain everything else. The material is derivative of consciousness. The material is actually, if you want to say it's an illusion, you can call it that, but it's a product of consciousness. It's a way that consciousness is arranged. So rather than looking at my computer as being a material thing, it's like that is something that exists in consciousness. Just like when I dream at night, when I'm in my dream, it feels real to me. It feels like it's physical. And I have more and more lucid dreams. And sometimes I'm astounded because I'm like, wow, I can really feel the sun on my body. But when I wake up, I'm like, there was no sun in my bed. I wasn't feeling the sun. I wasn't in the car that I thought I was driving, but it felt very real. And I believe that's the way this world is. Idealism says that consciousness never began. There is no beginning to consciousness. Again, it's interesting because physicists will tell us there's a beginning of time, but there is no beginning to consciousness. Therefore, consciousness never ends. So these are the two choices I believe that we have, fundamental choices. And as I started hearing about this term idealism, I started reading Dr. Kashrup's book, and he kept referring to religions. I realized that most religions are based on idealism. And this has been something that humans have known for thousands of years, at least tens of thousands of years. Idealism actually is the found it predates materialism. We became materialists basically about a couple hundred years ago, which is not very long in the history of mankind. If you look at creation, what we call myths, they all start with consciousness. And the thing that's fascinating about creation myths is they exist across cultures and space that they shouldn't. You know, these people in Australia have a creation myth that's very much like the people in South America. And they all start with this idea of consciousness, maybe some sort of a god that dreamt the world or that created the world and stepped into it. But they all start with consciousness. They all tell us that consciousness is eternal. I believe the idea of idealism is actually built into us. I think we all intuitively know this, but we've forgotten or it's been drummed out of us. So we have this illusion of separation. And the model, one of the models that works for me, and this is all analogy because we can't really grok it without having something to have an analogy. So if there's this collective consciousness, there's this soup of consciousness that everything is, that is everything. What happens is it kind of divides itself like a bubble and a solution. So the bubble and the solution is not separate. It's not made of something different. It presents as separate, and that's what presents as me. And then you're a bubble that presents as other, but we're really the same, all swimming in the same soup and all made of the same stuff. So when we come into these bodies, we are incarnated. But the thing is, again, I always love talking to near-death experiences because you guys know it's like the majority of us is still back home. And it's really interesting when people say they're like, okay, it's time for you to go back now. And they'll look at their body and they go, I'm supposed to fit in there. It's too small. What I've realized from talking to Frankie and hearing what her mother has to say, it's like, no, this is just a small part of you that's in here. This is just like a little bit of you. And there's a beautiful analogy she uses in her book. She says it's like if you're sitting on the bank of a river and you stick your toe in the water, the toe in the water is who we are in the incarnation, but we're still sitting on the bank of the river. And I get chills every time I think about this because that means I'm at some level I'm still with my daughter. You know, even now, even as I'm having this experience here. So Hinduism kind of talks about this in a way that makes a lot of sense to me. They call it Brahma, which is like the everything. And then the Brahma kind of divides itself into all the things that we perceive, part of that being us. So, us, me as an individual, I have this sense of a separate self, which is the ego, which kind of is the kind of the case or the thing about that bubble that creates me. But what's really interesting is even inside me, what they call the Atman is actually also what's outside of me. So when we go looking for God or looking for source or looking for whatever, all we have to do is turn within because we are that. But what this creates is this sense that there are other people, that there are objects, that there are events. And again, I hesitate to use the word that it's an illusion or it's a dream, even though it's like that, because it's very real. Because all we have is our consciousness, and the experiences are very real. So we do have this experience, but it's not the greater reality. It's not all there is that's going on. So my daughter Shayna loved to play video games, and it's interesting as we progress as mankind and we use different analogies to describe things, we use what we know. So Plato talked about the cave, the allegory of the cave, that we're these, we're in the cave, and all we can see is the wall. There's a flame behind us, and we see the shadows on the wall, and so that's what Plato used. Now we have virtual reality, which I think is a much stronger analogy. So if you've ever played a VR game, or if you haven't, you put a headset on and you have controllers. Once you put that headset on, everything you hear and everything you see is coming through the interface of that game. When you're in that game, you cannot perceive what's outside of the game. If you're in the room and your spouse is sitting on the couch and you're playing the game, you cannot see or hear your spouse. You interact with the world around you through the interface of that game. So it's truly immersive. It's funny. You can look up videos on YouTube. People will run into their TV screens. They will fall. They will because they feel like it's really real, like they're in the game. And I look at that. That's being in our body, and the five senses are our interface to this world. And so we think this is it, but this isn't it. We're just kind of basically playing a video game. we perceive only a tiny fraction of what exists. This again, this goes back to my science thing, right? But just look at the light spectrum. When we look at something, we look at out in the world right now, we don't see infrared on the low end. We don't see ultraviolet on the high end. We see a very small band of light. These pictures were created by a photographer. This is what if we could perceive ultraviolet with our eyes, this is kind of what we would see. And I believe they say this is what bees and what birds see when they look at flowers because they have a wider sense of range. And I think it's really fascinating when people have near death experiences. A lot of times they'll say where they saw colors that we've never seen here. And they say everything looked like it was lit from within. And I'm like, I wonder if that's actually what it's like here. We just can't see it because we're using these eyes that are so limited. We only hear a small band of sound. My dog, I was trying to take her earlier before the meeting started, and she wouldn't come to the door. And I realized it's because she could hear the thunder that was going on several miles away that I couldn't hear. And I'm like, I'm getting frustrated with her. I'm like, what's going on with her? But she's perceiving a different world. A dog's sense of smell is 10,000 to 100 times thousands stronger than ours. So when my dog goes out and she's sniffing around the yard, I'm like, why are you sniffing around there? It's because a deer walked across the yard yesterday and she can smell it, but I can't perceive it. Getting back to the scientific aspect, I think it was in the 1980s, for physicists to balance their equations, they said, okay, about 95% of the universe is what we call dark. There's dark matter, which is about almost 70% of the universe, and there's dark energy, which is about 27% of the universe. Now, the only reason we know it exists is because they needed to balance the equations, but we can't perceive it. We can't measure it, which I think is fascinating. And I kind of wonder sometimes, it's like, is that the spirit world, that we can't interact with? But again, the lesson is we think we know everything. We think we know so much, and we can only perceive. And I know when I say perceive, I don't mean like with our eyes and ears. I mean, even including our instruments. There's 95% of the universe we can't even detect. Going back to the color thing again, these are some illustrations of what birds look like to each other versus what they look like to us. So again, we're living in a very different world than the animals around us. The second thing that's a real big lesson for me, other than the fact that consciousness and everything, is that you're never alone. And this has been something that has been reinforced to me over and over again through the years I've been doing this work. And there are basically three ways to see our role in the world. One is this is the way a lot of people perceive it: solo. I am here on my own. I am the star of the show. This is all about me. There are other people around me, but this is really my journey. My life is my journey. The other thing that a lot of times when people start getting into spirituality is kind of like, okay, I'm the team leader. So I've got spirit guides, I've got our guardians, I've got angels. They're all here to support me, and it's great. They're backup players, but it's still all about me. And then this other role that is I'm a team member. That yeah, while I'm here, and again, full credit to Frankie and her mother for this analogy. It's like when you go on a business trip to represent your company. Before you go on the trip, you prepare, you get your pitch ready and everything, and you go and you're there on the trip alone, right? And you give your pitch, but you're representing your team, and then you go back and you debrief. And I'm like, this to me just really, really says a lot because I'm not here just for myself. Team members, we live vicariously through each other, so we don't all have the same experience, have to have the same exact experience. We get to share, and this made a lot of sense to me. So this is just a kind of recap of what I've already said, but these are the three basic ways that we can view things. And I know for me personally, I progressed from solo to team leader to that I'm a team member, that I'm here for not just my benefit, but the benefit of my entire team and ultimately of all mankind. And I want to say this, you're never alone. We feel like we're here alone, but we're here, we're doing our thing, we're doing our work, but we fall down, there's always someone there to pick us up. So you don't always perceive that person behind you there to pick you up, but they're always there. Again, I can't recommend these books enough, so I've mentioned them probably enough for this time. But if you guys want to pick them up, they're great books. So what happens when we die? Again, I like lists. I like breaking things down. So there are a few different ways to view this. The traditional view, which become the traditional view, which is not tradition when it goes back in history, is we blink out. We're like a light bulb. We turn off. When you flip the switch, the electric switch right now, if I turn off the lights in my office, they be out. They're gone. That's why a lot of people believe what happens when your brain goes offline. Some people believe we merge into the one. Now, this is interesting, and I don't, it's still, I guess, a bit controversial because I remember being at a conference and there was a person that had a near death experience and they were talking with someone else, and the one person was saying that we do merge into the one, and the other one says no, we always keep our individuality. And I've debated this with people, and here's what I think happens. um, we don't if we literally merge into the one, we would have no experience of being ourselves. And so we don't merge into the cosmic soup. That means we would lose our individuality. But we do become so close with everything around us and so connected that it feels like we've merged into the one. So what I believe actually happens is there's an expansion of consciousness when we leave our bodies. What happens is that we do lose the ego, that shell that makes us feel like we're an individual. And that's why people feel like they've merged into the one. But we do keep our sense of self. We do keep our individuality. We go beyond our story. I no longer am just Brian. I get access to all the other lives I've lived, for example. I get access to my team. So I retain the access to the memories I have, but I also picked up the memories that I've lost while I'm in this incarnation. I get access to the collective consciousness. I have reunion with my greater self, that part of me that's sitting back on the bank. And I have a reunion with my team. So this is the view that makes the most sense to me. Not that I blink out, of course, and not that I just go back into the cosmic soup and just become part of the whole thing, but that I become, more of what I actually truly am. I want to talk a little bit about the ego because the ego gets a bad rap. I hear people saying, I want to get rid of my ego. I want to kill the ego. There's actually a song called Kill the Ego. I believe that's a misunderstanding. The ego has a role to play. If you didn't have the ego, you could not live in your body. If you didn't have your ego, you would step out in front of a bus because you would have no fear. If you didn't have an ego, you would give all your money away because you wouldn't care about yourself. I think the ego is necessary for us to live in our body. It's what keeps us alive. But we need to keep the ego in check. It's not, which shouldn't be in charge. I believe that we have nothing to fear and everything to gain. And when I was going through my deconstruction of my religion, I tell you, it was a scary, scary thing because many times I felt like I was stepping off a cliff with nothing beneath me. Because I thought, if this isn't true, then what else isn't true? But as I've been on this journey for a long, long time, I can tell you that there's nothing to fear. And I find it's really interesting. I still love C.S. Lewis. I read pretty much everything he's written. I love this quote. He says, "It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex, um, and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased." And we talked earlier about clinging to this body. We talked about like this is it. This is life. I know what I like. I don't want to go to the other side. And I remember talking to Peter Panagore. You guys probably know him. And he said, living here is like living in a gutter. I think he said when you have a mansion. And it's the same image as C.S. Lewis. You're making mud pies in the slum. There's nothing to fear when we go home. This is a beautiful world. There's a lot of beauty here, but there's more beauty on the other side. And the way that Paul put it to the Corinthians said, this is what the scriptures mean when they say, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. And this is what people have NDEs have said. They said, I cannot tell you how beautiful it is. I cannot tell you what it's like to feel the love it's palpable. You can actually feel the love. So why would we fear that? And that's one of my goals is to help people lose that fear. Back to what I talk about, my slogan, Planet Not Buried. This is a quote from Jesus. He said, I assure you and most solemnly say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, just one grain, never more. But if it dies, it produces much grain and yields a harvest. So we individually, if we insist on retaining who we are and never becoming more by basically falling apart, we're never going to get to this point. But this is something that grief actually gives us an opportunity for. You've all heard the analogy of a caterpillar gets in the goes in cocoon and comes out a butterfly, which is overused for a reason because it's perfect. It's a great analogy. But a lot of people don't realize is when that caterpillar goes into the cocoon and seals the cocoon off, the next thing that happens is it digests itself and it becomes just this goo, this unrecognizable goo. That's what we go through when we go through the grief process. So I tell people when you can't pray, and I was at a point where I could not pray. There are two things that I turn to. One is there's a point in the Bible where Jesus is talking to this guy about healing his daughter, and Jesus said like if you believe I can do it, and the man says to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. That to me, it's so few words, but it's so profound. We don't have to have the full faith. Jesus said faith is a grain of a mustard seed. So just start down the path. Take a couple steps and try to hold on. The other thing you can always just say is help. We can all say that one word thing, right? And that help is there for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the models of grief. The old model of grief, which Freud said is basically get over it. Grief is it's a psychosis or it's a neurosis or but it's something you need to get over. It's an unhealthy attachment to something that you'll never have again. Your loved one is dead and gone. Face it, the attachment's unhealthy. Move on. Be a big boy. And actually, even modern psychology, psychiatry, they're talking about treating grief like an addiction. They think if they can treat grief like an addiction, they can come up with a pill that will cure grief. And I've talked to so many people in grief, including myself, and it's like unless you're going to give me a pill that's going to wipe out my memory, you're not going to cure my grief with a pill, and you're never going to get me over my addiction to my loved one. I don't want to get over my addiction, by the way. The DSM-5, which is the latest psychiatric handbook for diagnosing psychosis, I guess, defines prolonged grief disorder as they were saying they provide or define this thing they call prolonged grief disorder. Now, I'm not saying there isn't prolonged grief disorder because grief, even though it doesn't go away, it does change, and if it's causing you physical symptoms or something, then you need to get some help. But they're thinking, well, maybe we can treat grief with the drug, and that ain't ever going to happen. The new way that we look at grief, we call it continuing bonds. And in continuing bonds, we say your love never dies. Your loved one is now again. Not everybody has to believe exactly as I believe for this to even work. You might say, well, my love never dies, but they're not here anymore. I have memories and I have feelings. Okay, fine. If that works for you, that's okay. But you're just acknowledge your love never dies and it never will. The relationship continues. For me, my relationship with Shayna does continue. Someone asked me before we got started if I hear from Shayna, and I hear from her all the time. I talk to her all the time. There's a reason why her picture is behind me because she's a big part of what I do. Her picture is all over my house, and it always will be. Um, we honor our loved ones by living full, healthy lives. If you believe your loved one is gone and they are, I guess either miserable or non-existent, you might have what we call survivor's guilt. I shouldn't be here having a good time because my daughter can't enjoy it. I shouldn't be here having a good time because my husband passed away last year and he's not here to enjoy it. They are enjoying their lives a lot. You don't have to worry about whether they're enjoying themselves. And I got a great lesson from Shayna. Actually, the week before she passed, she was at a conference. She was at a volleyball tournament in Florida with my wife. My wife indulged Shayna in everything she wanted to do. So Kayla and I were here, and they were there. And my daughter's driving around this resort in golf carts, and she's 15 and a half. She doesn't even have a driver's license. So she's driving around, ordering $5 smoothies from room service, having oysters on the half shell for dinner. So she's just having a good old time. And my wife looked at her and said, don't you feel guilty, knowing that your father and Kayla are back home and you're having such a good time? Why don't you at least call them? And Shayna goes, I'll see them when I get home. I'm on vacation right now. I'm going to have a good time. That is what Shayna's doing right now. I know Shayna's having a good time. I am not worried about me having too much fun here while Shayna's over there suffering. People talk about grief shrinking over time. I I don't think it does. I think what happens is we grow around our grief. The analogy I like to use is like if you start going to the gym and you're lifting weights and you're lifting, say, a 15-pound dumbbell, at first it's going to feel very heavy. But after a few months of going to the gym and lifting that same dumbbell, it's going to feel lighter. Grief is an opportunity for us to grow and to actually get stronger. And so I view grief as a growth opportunity. And it is an opportunity, it's not a guarantee. We can always learn from any event that happens in our life by the knowledge that we gain from that event. We might learn something from it. We might develop a new skill or a new strength out of necessity. Sometimes grief and again, I don't think I said this earlier. Grief doesn't have to be just losing a person. It could be getting divorced. It could be losing a job. It could be moving. It could be your child moving out of the house. I was just talking with a guy about this the other day, and we were like, I cried when my daughter graduated from high school when she was going to go to college. That was a grief event for me. Um, and we can use tragedy to inspire us. The woman that started Mothers Against Drunk Driving used her daughter's death to inspire her to do something else. So when something negative happens to us, we can look at it and say, can I learn from this? How or have I learned from this? Can I develop a new strength or a new skill from this? Or can I use this to inspire me to do something else? This is a quote for one of my clients, and I was so proud of her when she said that. She said, I don't see my grief as something to be overcome. It's more of a companion. My grief is a result of the love I still have for my fiance. My grief will walk with me for the rest of my life as long as I love him. So when I look at emotions, grief, anger, fear, guilt, happiness, joy, whatever, they're all here to teach us something. Now, some of these emotions we don't want to hold on to: anger, guilt, shame. We don't want to hold on to this. Like, what are you here to teach me? And then you can go away. But our grief is always going to be here with us, and we need to learn not to try to fight it. And so, what is it? This higher perspective I've talked about, how do we hold on to it? Well, there's an old story about this Indian chief is talking to his grandson, and he tells us in the story that there's two wolves inside of you. One is peace and joy and love and compassion, etc. The other is anger, jealousy, guilt, fear, and these two wolves are fighting. And the little boy says to the grandfather, "Which one wins?" And he says, "Whichever one you feed." And this is the thing: we have a choice on a daily basis of whether we want to feed the fear or feed the love. And positive intelligence, we call these parts of ourselves sage and saboteurs. There's another system called integrated family systems, I believe. They call them parts. Um, there are different ways of saying the same thing, basically. But the sage is the part of us that tells ourselves, our higher self, if you want to call it that you are worthy, that other people are worthy, that every situation can be turned into a gift or an opportunity. Now, notice I didn't say it is a gift or an opportunity, but we can turn it into that you are never alone. The saboteur says you're not worthy, others aren't worthy either, your situation isn't good enough, you'll be happy when this happens, etc. And part of what I help people do and what I'm always trying to work on is like, how do I feed the sage and how do I quiet the saboteur? So I've come up with this four-step system that I call GEMS. It stands for gratitude. Gratitude practice is something I do every day. I used to scoff at this for a very long time. What do I have to be grateful for? My daughter died. I lost my job. Because we tend to focus on the negative, and that's part of being human. That's the way our brains are evolved. Our brains are evolved to keep us alive. They're evolved to tell us what's wrong, to spot things to be scared of. We have to train the other part of ourselves. So for me, I when I wake up in the morning before I get out of bed, my practice is I think of three things that I'm grateful for. And I don't just think about them, I feel them. Like I'm having dinner with my friends tonight, or my daughter was coming over this morning, or I get to present to IANDS this afternoon, or I can breathe, I can walk, whatever, things like that. Exercise, it's important to move our bodies in whatever way we can. For me, it's walking. I walk 6 miles every morning. It's for my body, it's for my mind, it's for my spirit. I meditate while I'm doing that. I listen to podcasts, I listen to music. There's mindfulness. I meditate twice a day. So I did before I met with you guys. And I encourage people to find ways because that helps us to make that shift when the saboteurs speak into me. First thing is I have to recognize it. Okay, that's a saboteur thought. And then I need to shift it to the other way. And I need to practice my mindfulness for that. Sleep is actually part of the exercise. I've actually updated it, and the S stands for self care. It's extremely important to take care of our bodies, our minds, and our spirit, especially when we're going through difficult times. Finding your tribe is extremely important. You guys are part of IANDS. That is great. You got to find like minded people you can talk to, people you can share with, people you can feel safe with. It might be your friends and your family, it might be your church, it might not be. When you go through a grief event, surprising people will come into your life. I'm going to say not even may. I think you're going to find surprising people come in your life, and actually, other people will leave your lives. That's happened to me and a lot of other people I know. So, peer-to-peer groups. I'm part of helping parents heal. So now it's time for the end of the story. Okay, if you remember, the first part of the story was that I was working for Sun, had a fantastic job. My wife and my daughter were staying at home, and we were thinking about moving to Cincinnati. I get fired unjustly, and I'm angry, I'm upset. I'm like, I don't want this. There's nothing good that can come out of this. So what happened is I was not super happy with Sun, even though I was making good money and stuff. But there was another opportunity working for someone, a partner, but it was a risk. It was a huge risk. It was a 100% commission job. And it was opening a new territory, and then I'd have to move to Cincinnati where I live now. And since I didn't have a job, I was like, I might as well try it because I'm literally unemployed at this point. So I called the guy up with the opportunity and I said, are you still looking for that position? And he said, yeah. So I took the job, moved to the house I'm in now, took a huge risk, signed a mortgage. I have zero salary now, like zero. And I'm in a brand new territory. We've never sold anything. Ended up making like 3 times as much money as I made with Sun. I'm still in the same house. It launched me on, I went from working from large companies to working in a small company. I learned how to run my own business. So I've run 2 of my own businesses at this point. So that event that happened to me, that I would have sworn nothing good can come of this, it's something good did come of it. So the slide I showed you before, because I also tell the story when I have time. There's a Dallas story about a farmer who finds a stallion, and you guys have probably heard this story. But everything in life, it could turn. It will turn. Nothing in this life is permanent. So let's be slow to judgment on whether something's good or bad. Love John Lennon. The older I get, the more I appreciate him. And he says everything will be okay in the end. If everything is not okay, it's not the end. And that is 100% true. We all know that we're going home eventually. That is good news, right? The journey to get there is going to be full of twists and turns. There are going to be ups and downs. They're going to be good and bad. I don't like to use those terms anymore because when I got divorced, I thought it was a bad thing. That wasn't a bad thing. When I got fired from my job, I thought it was a bad thing. That wasn't a bad thing. I've known people that have had cancer, who have lost children even, who says this was not a bad thing. You can get to that perspective eventually. If you want to know more about me, my website is grief2growth.com. It's grief numeral 2 growth.com. I have an online community. You go to grief2growth.com/community. I have a Substack, which is substack.com/grief2growth. But you can find everything at my website if you're interested in that. That's where you can find me on Substack, grief2growth.substack.com. I believe that's right. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. We still have a little bit of time. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay. If you have questions, please write them in the chat box. Rhonda, you had some questions?
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Brian. Wonderful presentation. And truly, I love how you first off, I want to acknowledge the depth of your pain, but how you went and explored and look at this wonderful thing you created to help not only you but everybody, and especially to bring it to people who, you provide steps like a stair step
Hmm.
across this bridge. It's beautiful. I love it. So
Thank you.
um, I too, I'm researching. I'm working on a PhD in transpersonal psychology.
Mm.
I'm almost done with a book that I'm writing about after death communication with my family after they had passed. And that, so my question to you is about what is your experience with your beautiful daughter? What kind of communications? How did it happen? Anything you feel comfortable sharing about it?
Yeah, well, actually, that's a whole nother hour-long presentation, but I'll give you a couple. Um, okay, so the most complicated, well, no, that's not the most complicated. One I had that was really complicated though. My daughter, I have a podcast, and so one day I was looking at my podcast on my phone for whatever reason, and I noticed that imagine every episode has a cover, and the cover is different because it's a different guest I've had.
Mhm.
Every cover of every episode had changed to this picture of Shayna. And it's a picture, one of my favorite pictures of her when she's like 2 years old. She had these building blocks and she's got them stacked up over her head. I remember that day I walked in the family room and I saw her with these blocks. But every picture on my podcast, it changed to that picture of Shayna. Now I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm an engineer. So I'm like, and I sold computers for years. How did this happen? And then I thought, is everybody like across the world seeing this? Everybody's looking at my podcast. So I looked at my podcast on my computer and the
Mhm.
picture hadn't changed. And so I'm glad I took screenshots of this because if I didn't, I wouldn't believe it even myself. And then I went back a couple days later, I looked at my podcast on my phone and the pictures had all changed back. So
Interesting.
that was one of the things that she's done. Also, the traditional things of birds and, insects
Mhm.
and stuff like that. But she speaks to me a lot through synchronicities, just crazy things happening. And one that's really interesting to me because sometimes, Shayna, she likes a challenge and she would spar with me all the time verbally and stuff. And one day I was listening to a podcast, I was getting ready to go for my walk. I heard this woman say on the podcast, her daughter had passed away. She said, one of the signs I get is when I go out, someone will walk up to me and say, I knew your daughter when she was alive.
Oh my
And I
God.
thought, that's not a sign. And I would never tell anybody that. I would never tell anybody that your sign's not a sign. But I just said to myself, that's not a sign, just coincidence. They knew your daughter. Doesn't mean anything. So I go on my walk and I walk the exact same route every day. And at that point, I've been doing it for 6 or 7 years probably. So I walked this route a couple thousand times. And I'm walking that day and I'm walking past this house that I walk past 3 times a day because I do a loop at that point. And this woman's walking down the driveway toward me, and I take my earbuds out because I'm like, she's going to say something to me. And she goes, my name is Nicole. I knew your daughter Shayna when she was in the Girl Scouts. Our daughters were in Girl Scouts together. And I was like,
Oh
okay,
my
why
goodness.
would she choose today to walk down the driveway and tell me that? I walk by her house every single day. So that's another thing Shayna's done. And it's just, I can go on from there.
That's fantastic. Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Have you had any lucid dreams with your daughter too that you can talk about?
Yeah, I have. I haven't had one in quite a while. When I have them, she's always younger. Because I always wished if I could freeze my a day in time, it'd be when my girls were 4 and 7. So I always
Mhm.
picture Shayna around the age of 4, and so when she comes to me, it's usually between the ages of 4 and 10. So I've
Oh,
had a few of those.
beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Oh, that's gorgeous. Such a wonderful, wonderful gift to us. Thank you, Brian, so much. Who else has something that they'd like to know? Chat box. Rhonda, you have another one?
So, so I'm curious about your soul phone. I know you're working with that with several other people, and can you fill us in, or is this secret?
Yeah, it's I can tell you this. There has been some stuff published on the Soul Phone so far, and it actually soul phone where it's voice to voice or voice is not that won't happen for a while. Switch where we can get yes or no answers from the afterlife, that's already been done. They're working on making it better so they can turn it into like a commercial product. It's in a kind of a blackout stage now where they're not showing a lot of information on it. So, but the proof of concept is definitely there and has been done, and I think that's actually been published.
Wow.
I see that Kit asked about reading lists being on my website. If you go to brieftogrowth.com/store, I have a resource list there that has a ton of stuff on it as far as podcasts, books, movies, stuff I've read, stuff like that. But I can tell you right off the top, a couple of my favorites is I mentioned in the presentation, Why Materialism is Baloney by Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. The Team by Francis Key. Frankie's been on my podcast 2 or 3 times, I think, at least 2 or 3 times. Dr. Kastrup has been on my podcast. Those I love. Jens Amberts wrote a book called Why an Afterlife Obviously Exists. It's a short book based on NDEs. That was really great. Ken Ring, I can't remember the name of his book right now. Bruce Grayson, you guys probably know a lot of these people. Bruce Grayson wrote a great book. I think it's called Afterlife. Those are some of my favorites.
And mostly those are all going to be there at your website?
Yeah, they'll be on that resource list.
And with that resource list, do you have them in any order, or do you have any descriptions about them? I mean, I know we can go to Amazon or wherever and look at
Yeah, order
descriptions.
is a great point. There's just so much. It just depends on what piques your interest, because there's different books. Penny Sartori, like she studied NDEs in detail. So if you're okay, I want to be able to prove to myself that NDEs are real. Penny Sartori's book would be great for that. If you want to know about afterlife communications, how do I communicate with someone in the afterlife? That would be like Suzanne Wilson's book, Soul Smart. So it depends on what you're looking, where you want to get started.
Well, and I've read a lot in various realms. I don't have doubts about the afterlife or communication. I definitely actually would like to be more about me creating my own connection to mysticism, not mysticism, my gift of mediumship.
Okay.
Do
Soul
you
Smart.
meditate? Do
Soul
you
Smart by Suzanne Wilson.
Great, thank you.
Do you meditate?
Not enough.
Well, that meditation can really open you up. That's what happened to me. I used Sonia Choquette's tapes for meditation this was 30 years ago, and within a couple of weeks of using those tapes, I went right through the tunnel to the other side, and it changed my life. And being in connection with your guides and the spirits on the other side, if you want the books that are important for you, all you have to do is ask. If you need a parking place, all you have to do is ask. Before I was even on a spiritual journey, I discovered by accident that I could ask for a parking place. And it wasn't like you might think 50% of the time. It was 100% of the time. Every single time I asked for a parking place, I had one right in front. My husband was music critic for the Chicago Tribune. And when he got connected with me, we started parking right in front of the Lyric Opera every time he went to review an opera. And he said, "I've never parked here before." And I said, "Well, you ride with me, because I asked for the place, and we had one right in front of the opera every week." So, it makes an enormous difference in talking to your guides and making them aware of what you want. The only time I've experienced people not getting what they want is when it interferes with the lessons they came to learn. If you ask for something and it's something you need to learn on your own, they won't help you. But otherwise, they do. And it's quite an amazing connection. As I said, those tapes were very, very helpful to me in the beginning to get started. Meditation is a great way to make that connection. Mhm. Sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah, no problem. But when it comes to meditation, I'd say top couple things. Kelvin Chen, I've studied with. He has a meditation technique called Turning Within, which is awesome. So you could look for
How do you
that.
spell his last name?
Chin, Chin, Kelvin Chin, and it's called Turning Within. And then there's a free app that I use on my phone called Insight Timer. So that will give you, like, if you want ambient music or sounds or guided meditations, there's a ton of stuff in Insight Timer, and there's a free version and a premium version. I've been using the free version for I don't know how many years now, but so I would check that out. It's really good to develop a practice. It'll track how long you've meditated, how many days in a row you've meditated, and I find that's really helpful for me to stay motivated.
And what is the name of that again?
Insight Timer, INSIGHT.
Insight Timer.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Wonderful to know these things.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Anybody, are there any? I can't get my chat to open up correctly. Does anybody else see anything else on there? I don't know what's going
Okay,
on.
so Vicky asked about my podcast, and someone else asked about the website. So just to be really clear, it's grief, the numeral 2, growth. So it's grief2growth.com. The podcast is Grief to Growth, and it's also Grief to Growth on YouTube and Facebook. Everything is Grief to Growth. So if you want to find me on those social medias.
This video from today's meeting will be available within the next day or so, along with more than 100 others from our previous lectures. So don't be shy. Help yourself.
Yeah, and then Rhonda made a comment about 80% of people receive after-earth communication signs after loved ones have physically died. Yeah, that number it sounds about right, especially for people who've lost spouses. I know it's really high. And the mediums were crazy accurate in Gary's study.
Yes.
And it's really wild because, like I said, I read that book. I think it's been 22, 23 years since it came out.
Yeah.
And now I know most of the mediums that were in the study. I've become friends with a lot of those people, and they are just off the charts amazing.
He spoke for us about 20 years ago. He was here in my house.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. I think he finally just officially retired from University of Arizona.
Did he?
Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. Wow. Yeah. What? Wow. Brian, it's just been wonderful to hear what you had to say. Everything was so relevant, and I'm sure a lot of us will be watching it again when it gets posted online. So,
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
oh, thank you for coming. Thank you so very much. Anybody else have any other questions? Last chance. Okay.
All right.
Well, we hope to see you all next month with Pim Van Lommel and cardiologist. And if you have a chance, take a look at the information about the conference. So take good care, you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. It's always on the second Saturday. Nice to see you all. Thanks.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Wonderful.
It was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you so much.